It was a crisp Friday evening in the small, quiet town of Ridgeview. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over the streets. Families were settling into their routines, and the town's local diner bustled with chatter and clinking plates. Down the road, the roar of motorcycle engines echoed through the air, a sound that both excited and unsettled the townsfolk. The Bison Brotherhood, a notorious local biker group, was known to gather here on weekends, filling the air with their intimidating presence. Marcus Johnson, a tall, well-built man in his early 30s, walked calmly down the main street. His demeanor was quiet yet commanding. Dressed simply in jeans and a black hoodie, he carried a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Marcus had just returned from a weekend hike in the nearby mountains, seeking solitude and reflection. To the average onlooker, he appeared as just another passerby, but Marcus carried a secret few could imagine. He was a highly trained Navy SEAL, a veteran of missions that demanded precision, resilience, and an unshakable moral compass. As Marcus approached a corner near the gas station, the distinctive rumble of the bikers' engines grew louder. He glanced toward the parking lot, where a group of bikers stood, laughing and exchanging stories. Their leather jackets bore the insignia of the Bison Brotherhood. Marcus paid them no mind, heading toward a small convenience store to grab a drink for the road. Inside the store, Marcus was met with the cheerful greeting of the elderly store clerk, Mrs. Ethel. She'd known Marcus since he was a kid visiting his grandmother during summers in Ridgeview. "Marcus, good to see you back in town. Still chasing those mountain trails?" she asked warmly. Marcus smiled, his deep voice resonating. "Always, Mrs. Ethel. Can't beat the peace out there." As he exchanged pleasantries with her, a loud commotion erupted outside. Marcus turned toward the window and saw a biker staring in his direction, his expression darkening. It was clear from the tension in the air that something was brewing. Marcus stayed calm, paid for his items, and stepped outside. "Hey you," one of the bikers shouted, stepping forward. He was a burly man with a long beard and a sneer that hinted at trouble. The group turned their attention to Marcus, their laughter now replaced with a charged silence. "What are you doing in our town?" The man continued, his tone laced with disdain. Marcus didn't flinch. His years of training taught him to assess situations without letting emotions cloud his judgment. "Just passing through," he replied evenly, his gaze steady but non-confrontational. The biker sneered, taking a step closer. "Don't look like you belong here." At this, the other bikers chuckled darkly, creating a wall of noise that seemed designed to intimidate. Marcus noticed the store clerk watching nervously from the window, her hand hovering near the phone. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "Just minding my own business." But the bikers weren't interested in hearing him out. They circled him like predators, their taunts escalating. Marcus stood his ground, his body relaxed but ready. He wasn't one to pick fights, but he also wouldn't back down if pushed too far. "What are you, some kind of tough guy?" Another biker jeered, stepping closer. "Think you can just walk through here like you own the place?" Marcus's silence seemed to irritate them further. They mistook his calm demeanor for fear, unaware that they were dealing with someone who had faced dangers far greater than they could imagine. As tensions reached a boiling point, one of the bikers reached out, shoving Marcus hard enough to make him step back. The street grew eerily quiet. Even the other bikers hesitated, sensing something shift in Marcus' expression. It wasn't anger, it was a calculated focus, the kind that came from years of discipline. Marcus straightened, his eyes locking onto the man who had pushed him. "You don't want to do that," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying an unmistakable warning. But the bikers didn't heed it. Fueled by arrogance and the camaraderie of their gang, they closed in, ready to assert their dominance. What they didn't realize was that Marcus wasn't just any man. He had spent years defending his country, honing skills that made him one of the most formidable individuals in any room, or, in this case, on any street. As the first biker raised his hand, ready to strike, Marcus remained still, his eyes sharp and focused. He didn't want to escalate the situation, but he was prepared for whatever came next. The scene teetered on the edge of chaos, the air thick with tension. And then, just as the biker lunged forward, Marcus made his move, swift, controlled, and precise. But what happened next would leave everyone, including the Bison Brotherhood, questioning everything they thought they knew of the quiet man who had walked into their town. This was only the beginning. The biker's fist cut through the air, aimed squarely at Marcus. Time seemed to slow for a moment as Marcus shifted his weight, stepping aside with a fluidity that seemed almost unnatural. The biker stumbled forward, his momentum carrying him past Marcus, who hadn't so much as raised a hand in retaliation. The other members of the Bison Brotherhood froze, caught off guard by the ease with which their comrade was avoided. Marcus turned slowly, his face still calm, but his eyes carried a quiet warning. "You should stop now," Marcus said evenly, his voice low but firm. "This doesn't have to go any further." The biker who'd thrown the punch straightened up, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "You think you're fast, huh?" he spat, brushing himself off. "You've got no idea who you're messing with." One of the other bikers, a wiry man with tattoos snaking up his neck, laughed harshly. "Come on, Bear. He's just some nobody passing through. Teach him a lesson." But Marcus wasn't nobody, and Bear, as the leader was called, was about to find out. As Bear stepped forward again, Marcus subtly adjusted his footing. Years of combat training had taught him how to read people, how they moved, where they carried their weight, the telltale signs of an impending attack. To Marcus, Bear was an open book. "I don't want to hurt you," Marcus said, his voice steady. But Bear didn't care. He swung again, this time with more force, aiming for Marcus's midsection. Marcus deflected the blow with a swift motion, stepping back just enough to keep distance between them. The tension in the air thickened. The other bikers began to fan out, surrounding Marcus. Their laughter grew louder, more taunting, as if they believed their numbers would intimidate him. But Marcus remained calm, his breathing steady, his focus razor-sharp. Inside the convenience store, Mrs. Ethel clutched the phone tightly in her hand. She had dialed 911, but hesitated to press send. She knew Marcus well enough to understand he wasn't a man who sought trouble. But the bikers? They were a different story. She whispered a silent prayer, her eyes darting back to the scene outside. Marcus could feel the energy shift. This wasn't just about him anymore. These men weren't going to back down, and the situation was spiraling out of control. He didn't want to escalate it, but he also wasn't about to let them overpower him. He'd seen too much in his life to let fear or hesitation cloud his judgment. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," one of the bikers sneered. "But guts won't save you." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "You don't know what you're starting." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Marcus wasn't just issuing a warning. He was giving them an opportunity to walk away, to avoid a confrontation they couldn't possibly win. But the Brotherhood wasn't interested in peace. They thrived on intimidation, on using fear to maintain their dominance in the town. Bear smirked, his confidence unshaken. "Oh, we know exactly what we're starting," he said, cracking his knuckles. "The question is, do you?" Marcus's mind flashed back to his training, to the missions that had taken him to the farthest corners of the world. He thought of the countless times he diffused situations like this, always choosing precision over chaos. He wasn't a man who fought recklessly, but when pushed, he was a force to be reckoned with. As the bikers closed in, Marcus took a slow, deliberate breath. His stance shifted subtly, his weight balanced evenly on the balls of his feet. Every move he made was calculated, every decision born from years of experience. He wasn't just preparing to defend himself, he was preparing to end this before it spiraled out of control. But before anything could happen, the sound of distant sirens cut through the air. The bikers hesitated, their bravado faltering for the first time. Marcus didn't move, his gaze steady as he watched their leader. Bear's expression twisted with frustration and anger, but he wasn't foolish enough to take on the law. "You're lucky," Bear muttered, his voice low but dripping with venom. "Next time, there won't be any interruptions." Marcus didn't respond. He stood silently as the bikers backed off, their engines roaring to life as they sped away into the night. The tension lingered in the air long after they were gone, like the echo of a storm that had narrowly missed its mark. Mrs. Ethel emerged from the store, her face pale but relieved. "Marcus, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "I'm fine, Mrs. Ethel. Don't worry about me." She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Those men, they're dangerous. You should be careful." "I know," Marcus said quietly. He glanced down the road where the bikers had disappeared, his thoughts clouded with unease. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the sirens grew louder, Marcus turned back to the store. "I'll stick around until the police get here," he said. "Make sure everything's okay." Mrs. Ethel nodded, her hands still trembling. "Thank you, Marcus. You're a good man." Marcus didn't respond, but her words stayed with him. He had always believed in standing up for what was right, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But tonight felt different. The bikers weren't just a random group looking for trouble. They were organized, deliberate, and dangerous. As the police car pulled into the parking lot, Marcus felt a familiar sense of resolve settle over him. This wasn't the first time he faced a threat, and it wouldn't be the last. But one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let fear dictate his actions. The officer who stepped out of the car was a young man Marcus recognized from his childhood. Officer Daniels had grown up in Ridgeview just like Marcus, and the two shared a brief nod of recognition. "Marcus," Daniels said, his tone professional but friendly, "I got a call about some trouble with the Bison Brotherhood. You okay?" "I'm fine," Marcus replied. "They're gone now, but they'll be back. You know how they are." Daniels sighed, his expression grim. "Yeah, I know, they've been causing problems all over town. But it's hard to pin anything on them. People are too scared to talk." Marcus nodded, understanding the unspoken challenge. The Brotherhood operated on fear and intimidation, making it nearly impossible for the law to hold them accountable. But Marcus wasn't like most people. He wasn't afraid to stand up to them, no matter the cost. As Daniels took down Mrs. Ethel's statement, Marcus leaned against the wall, his thoughts racing. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. The Brotherhood wasn't the type to let things go, and they would be back, stronger, angrier, and more determined than ever. For now, the night was quiet again, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. The night grew still after the police left, but Marcus couldn't shake the weight of what had just happened. Ridgeview had always been a quiet town, a place where people knew each other by name, where kids rode their bikes freely, and where trouble rarely lingered. But the Bison Brotherhood had changed that. Over the years, they had transformed from a group of misfit bikers into a looming shadow over the community. Their presence wasn't just intimidating, it was suffocating. And tonight, Marcus had stepped into their crosshairs. Back at his grandmother's small house on the edge of town, Marcus sat on the front porch, the cool night air brushing against his skin. He could hear the faint hum of crickets in the distance, a sound that used to bring him peace. Now, it only reminded him of the quiet before a storm. His thoughts wandered back to the encounter outside the store. He handled the situation calmly, but he knew that wasn't the end of it. The Brotherhood didn't let things slide. They thrived on dominance, and anyone who challenged that was marked. Inside the house, the warm glow of the kitchen light spilled onto the porch. His grandmother, Evelyn, shuffled to the door, her frail figure silhouetted against the light. She had raised Marcus after his parents passed away, teaching him resilience and kindness. Now in her late 70s, Evelyn was still sharp as ever, her eyes full of wisdom earned through years of hardship. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly, stepping onto the porch with a mug of tea in her hands. "Something on your mind?" Marcus glanced at her, offering a small smile. "Just thinking." She handed him the mug and sat down beside him, her hands resting on her lap. "Is it about those bikers? I saw the police car earlier." Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "They're trouble drama. Always have been. But tonight felt different. They're not just picking fights. They're pushing boundaries." Evelyn sighed, her expression turning somber. "The Brotherhood's been a thorn in this town's side for years. People are scared to stand up to them. And now, with you back, they might see you as a threat." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He took a sip of the tea, letting its warmth ground him. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said finally. "But I wouldn't let them push me or anyone else around." Evelyn reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You've always been strong, Marcus, but strength isn't just about fighting. Sometimes it's about knowing when to walk away." Her words lingered in his mind as the night deepened. Marcus knew she was right in some ways, but his instincts told him that walking away wasn't an option this time. The Brotherhood wasn't just a group of bullies. They were a threat to the town's safety, and ignoring them would only embolden them further. The next morning, Marcus decided to take a walk into town. He wanted to check on Mrs. Ethel and see if she was doing okay after last night. As he approached the convenience store, he noticed something strange. The windows were intact, but the store's front door hung slightly ajar. Marcus quickened his pace, his senses on high alert. Inside, Mrs. Ethel was cleaning up a mess near the counter. A display rack had been knocked over, its contents scattered across the floor. She looked up as Marcus entered, her face lighting up with relief. "Marcus, I'm so glad you're here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "What happened?" Marcus asked, his eyes scanning the room. "Someone broke in early this morning," she said, shaking her head. "Didn't take much, just a few things from the shelves, but they left this." She held up a piece of paper, her hands trembling. On it, scrawled in bold, messy handwriting, were the words, "Stay out of our way." Marcus's jaw tightened as he took the note. He didn't need to ask who had left it. The Brotherhood was sending a message, and it wasn't just about him. They were trying to intimidate anyone who might stand against them. "Did you call the police?" Marcus asked. Mrs. Ethel nodded. "They came by earlier, but there's not much they can do without proof. And you know how it is. No one wants to name names." Marcus folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. "Don't worry, Mrs. Ethel. I'll make sure you're safe." Her eyes filled with gratitude but also fear. "Marcus, you're a good man. But these people, they don't play fair. You need to be careful." "I will," he promised, though he knew the road ahead was anything but safe. As he left the store, Marcus's mind raced. The Brotherhood wasn't just targeting him. They were making a statement to the entire town. And if no one else was willing to stand up to them, then it was up to him. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed to understand their operation, their weaknesses, and what drove them. That evening, Marcus reached out to an old friend, Jake, who had served with him in the Navy. Jake had retired a few years earlier and was now working in private security. If anyone could help him navigate the situation, it was Jake. When Jake picked up the phone, his voice was as familiar as ever. "Marcus, long time brother, what's going on?" Marcus explained the situation, laying out everything that had happened since his return to Ridgeview. Jake listened carefully, his tone growing serious. "Sounds like you've got a real mess on your hands," Jake said. "These guys aren't just a bunch of punks, they're organized. If they're leaving threats, they've probably got something bigger going on." "That's what I'm worried about," Marcus admitted. "They're not just harassing people, they're trying to control the town." Jake paused, considering. "You need intel. Find out who's at the top, what they're running, and how they're keeping people quiet. Once you know that, you can figure out how to take them down without putting yourself or anyone else in danger." Marcus nodded, his resolve hardening. "Thanks, Jake. I'll keep you updated." After the call, Marcus sat in the quiet of his grandmother's house, formulating a plan. The Brotherhood was more than just a group of bikers. They were a network of intimidation, and their grip on the town was tighter than he'd realized. If he was going to stand up to them, he needed more than strength. He needed strategy. As the night wore on, Marcus felt the weight of what lay ahead. The Brotherhood wasn't going to back down, and neither was he. The storm was coming, and he had to be ready. Ridgeview wasn't just a town to him, it was home, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. The days that followed were a blur of careful preparation and unshakable tension. Marcus spent hours observing the Brotherhood from a distance, piecing together the network that kept them in power. He learned their patterns, their hangout spots, and even caught glimpses of the man who seemed to be calling the shots, a burly figure known around town as Kane. Kane had a reputation for being ruthless, and from what Marcus could gather, he was the one orchestrating the Brotherhood's reign of fear. Word spread quickly in Ridgeview about Marcus's encounter with the gang. Some people admired his courage, while others feared it would only make things worse. Evelyn stayed quiet about her concerns, but Marcus could see it in her eyes every time he left the house. She would sit by the window, watching him disappear down the road, her hands clasped tightly as if silently praying for his safety. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus sat in his truck, parked a safe distance from the Brotherhood's clubhouse. The building was an old, run-down warehouse on the outskirts of town, surrounded by motorcycles and dim, flickering lights. The air was thick with the smell of oil and smoke, and the faint sound of raucous laughter drifted through the open windows. Marcus knew he couldn't go in unprepared. This wasn't the kind of fight you could win on instinct alone. He had spent the past few days gathering as much information as he could. A few townsfolk, emboldened by his presence, had begun to share their stories. They spoke of extortion, threats, and even rumors of a larger operation involving stolen goods. It was clear the Brotherhood wasn't just a gang. They were running a full-fledged criminal enterprise, and Kane was at the center of it all. Marcus tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, his mind racing. He wasn't just up against a group of bullies. He was up against a well-oiled machine. But despite the odds, he felt a deep sense of purpose. He had faced worse in his years as a Navy SEAL, and while this battle was different, it was no less important. This wasn't about medals or missions. This was about protecting his home. As he sat there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was Jake. Marcus answered, his voice low. "Got something for me?" Marcus asked. "More than something," Jake replied. "I did some digging on this Kane guy. Turns out he's got a record longer than a CVS receipt. Assault, racketeering, you name it. But here's the kicker. He's got ties to a bigger outfit upstate. The Brotherhood's just a small branch of something much larger." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. "So, taking him down here might draw bigger fish." "Exactly," Jake said. You're walking into a hornet's nest, brother. You sure you're ready for this? Marcus glanced at the clubhouse, the laughter inside growing louder. I don't have a choice. These people are terrorizing my town, Jake. Someone has to stand up to them. Jake sighed on the other end of the line. All right, just don't do anything reckless. And remember, if things go south, I'm a phone call away. As the call ended, Marcus felt a surge of determination. He had a plan, but he needed to act carefully. The Brotherhood wasn't just a group of thugs, they were a part of something bigger. And if he wasn't careful, he could end up in over his head. That night, Marcus returned home to find Evelyn waiting for him in the living room. The soft glow of the lamp cast long shadows across the room, and her face was etched with worry. You're going after them, aren't you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. I have to, Grandma. They're not going to stop unless someone makes them. Evelyn reached out, taking his hand in hers. Promise me you'll be careful. I've already lost too much, Marcus. I can't lose you too. I promise, he said, his voice firm. I'll be careful. The next day, Marcus put his plan into motion. He started by visiting the people who had shared their stories with him, assuring them that he was working to put an end to the Brotherhood's control. Some offered to help, while others begged him to let it go, fearing the repercussions. But Marcus knew there was no turning back. He also reached out to the local police chief, a man named Harris. Harris was a decent man, but his hands were tied. The Brotherhood had too much influence, and without solid evidence, there was little he could do. Still, Marcus managed to convince him to keep an eye on the situation and be ready to step in if things escalated. By the time night fell, Marcus was ready to confront Kane. He knew it was risky. Walking into the lion's den without backup was a gamble. But he also knew that if he waited too long, the Brotherhood would only tighten their grip on the town. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for Ridgeview. As he approached the clubhouse, the air crackled with tension. The motorcycles lined up outside gleamed under the dim lights, their chrome reflecting the surrounding darkness. Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he pushed to the side. He had faced danger before, and he wasn't about to back down now. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The Brotherhood members were drinking, laughing, and reveling in their dominance. Kane sat at the head of the room, his presence commanding and unyielding. Marcus stepped through the door, his eyes locking onto Kane's. The room fell silent, the laughter fading as the bikers turned to face the intruder. Kane leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. Well, if it isn't the hero of Ridgeview, come to join the party. Marcus didn't flinch. He stood tall, his voice steady. I'm here to make you an offer, Kane. Leave this town or face the consequences. The room erupted in laughter, the sound echoing off the walls. Kane's smirk widened, but his eyes glinted with malice. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you're outnumbered, outgunned, and way out of your league. What makes you think you can take us on? Marcus' gaze never wavered. Because I've seen men like you before, and I know how this ends. The room fell silent again, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Kane's smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. But before he could respond, one of his men stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife. Marcus shifted his stance, his training kicking in as he prepared for what was coming. The Brotherhood wasn't going to back down without a fight, and the storm that had been brewing was about to break. The Brotherhood member, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped closer to Marcus, the glint of his knife catching the dim light. The room buzzed with a dangerous energy, every pair of eyes watching to see how the newcomer would handle himself. Marcus remained still, his stance calm but calculated, his eyes locked on the man in front of him. The silence stretched, taut like a wire about to snap. Then a move so fast it left the onlookers stunned. Marcus disarmed the man in a single fluid motion. The knife clattered to the floor, and Marcus stepped back, holding his hands up as if to say, I don't want to do this, but I will if I have to. The scarred man stumbled, clutching his wrist, his face a mixture of pain and shock. The room erupted into chaos, shouting, chairs scraping against the floor, and the unmistakable sound of someone cocking a gun. Enough. Kane's voice cut through the noise like a whip. He stood, towering over the room, his eyes fixed on Marcus. You've made your point, Navy boy, but you just signed your own death warrant. The tension in the room was palpable as Kane signaled to his men. Several of them moved to surround Marcus, but before they could close in, the sound of screeching tires pierced the night. Every head turned toward the door, and moments later, it burst open, revealing a shadowy figure silhouetted against the headlights of a truck. Jake stepped into the room, his face set in a grim expression, holding a badge in one hand and a holstered weapon in the other. "Federal agent, everyone stand down." His voice was like steel, cutting through the chaos. The Brotherhood members hesitated, their confidence shaken by the unexpected arrival. Marcus felt a surge of relief, but kept his expression neutral. He hadn't expected Jake to show up, but he was glad to have backup. Kane, however, didn't seem fazed. He crossed his arms, his smirk returning. "You really think flashing a badge is gonna scare us? This ain't your jurisdiction, Fed." Jake stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You're right, Kane, but it'll be my jurisdiction when I finish linking you to interstate trafficking. You got sloppy, and we got the evidence to prove it." The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of Jake's words sinking in. Marcus could see the doubt creeping into the faces of the bikers. They weren't just facing a local hero anymore. They were up against the law, and the game had changed. But before anyone could make a move, another sound shattered the moment, the unmistakable wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flashed outside the clubhouse, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Kane's smirk finally faltered, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. Marcus used the distraction to his advantage. "It's over, Kane. You can fight us and make this worse, or you can face the consequences like a man." Kane's jaw tightened, but instead of responding, he barked an order to his men. "Scatter!" Now, the Brotherhood erupted into motion, some rushing toward the back exits, others grabbing whatever weapons they could find. Chaos consumed the room as Marcus and Jake moved to block the exits, trying to contain the situation. But just as Marcus thought they had the upper hand, a loud crash echoed from behind him. He turned to see a hidden door swinging open, revealing a concealed passage. Kane and a few of his closest men were already disappearing into the darkness. Marcus felt his heart sink. The stakes had just been raised again. If Kane escaped, everything they'd worked for would be for nothing. He turned to Jake, who nodded, understanding without words. They couldn't let Kane get away. The two men sprinted toward the passage, their footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor. The air grew colder as they descended, the faint sound of water dripping in the distance. It was clear Kane had planned for this. The passage was designed for a quick and covert escape. As they ran, Marcus's mind raced. This wasn't just about stopping Kane anymore. It was about sending a message that no one, no matter how powerful or untouchable they thought they were, could terrorize a community without consequences. But there was more to it than that. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Kane's operation went deeper than anyone realized, and if they didn't stop him now, they might never get another chance. The corridor opened into a large underground chamber, dimly lit by a single, flickering bulb. Kane stood at the far end, a loaded shotgun in his hands, his men flanking him. The tension was suffocating as Marcus and Jake approached, their movements slow and deliberate. "End of the line, Kane," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. Kane laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning. Take me down and someone else will take my place. You can't stop what we've built." Marcus' jaw tightened. He had heard similar words before, from enemies who thought they were invincible. But he knew better. No empire, no matter how strong, was unbreakable. As the standoff stretched, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Marcus glanced back to see several police officers entering the chamber, their weapons drawn. Harris was at the front, his expression grim but resolute. "Kane White," Harris called out, his voice firm. "You're under arrest for multiple charges, including racketeering and aggravated assault. Drop your weapon and come quietly." For a moment, it seemed like Kane might comply. But then his grip on the shotgun tightened, and Marcus saw the glint of desperation in his eyes. This wasn't just about power for Kane. It was about survival, and desperate men were dangerous. The room was a powder keg, moments away from exploding. Marcus knew they were on the brink of the climax, but how it would end was far from certain.